complicated, you know, man. It's like a damn Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about a blue, red, man, then you get to one side, and like,
If you share my lack of faith in our health system, you should take control of your well-being. Building resilience and maintaining good health for the long term needs to be a priority. Axios Remote Fitness Coaching offers one-stop expert advice on training, diet, and lifestyle. You can purchase customized workout plans for strength training or structured exercise. If you're serious about maximizing your potential, you can book time with a coach or customize your routine and get video feedback on your performance. I know the owner, and he's one of us. Visit Axios and support those who support the show. Follow the link in the description to become a man of action with Axios. No one blames you for being weak, but it's your fault if you stay that way. All right, MikeOfPol, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me on, by the way.
Yeah, sure, man. I'm glad to talk with you. I like many episodes. You know, this is one that's been in the works for a while, and I'm glad to finally have the chance to speak with you.
Of course, yeah. It's I'm always here. I'm here to please.
So, for the people who don't, know you, could you describe, who you are and what you do on the internet?
Yeah, sure. So, like, in terms of like a poster, I'm kind of new to the scene, but I've been a lurker for many years because you have to lurk on these on these esoteric forums related to basket weaving for many years before you post, as you know. But no, I have a Substack and I have a Odyssey. But generally, my goal is to motivate people into manufacturing. I want you to either be in trades. I want you to be in hucking out parts out of your 3D printer CNC machine, anything or lathe, anything that you have. I want to expand every sensitive young man's capacity to produce something of value, to engage in the real economy. And if you can engage in the real economy, you can engage in anti-economy. And that's kind of like, I come from a, I guess, esoteric anarchist background that comes from post-left kind of beginnings with the GunCAD movement. And that's kind of like where I come from to the dissonant right is through GunCAD, through 3D2A. And, I wear the visage of J Stark 1809. If you don't know, he is the inventor, designer of the FGC-9, the most prolific, the most well-known, completely DIY 3D printed gun in existence. He was martyred by the German state. And that's kind of like where my energy comes from, is like, I will not dishonor this martyrdom towards like being productive, like this genuine seed of rebellion to what is in our world, that is evil and bad. And that's the long and short of it, I guess.
Well, fair enough, man. You've put a lot out there, and a lot of that's really good stuff. But I want to go back through and examine that, right? So you mentioned this term, GunCAD. Could you describe just very basically, what that is, what that community is, and kind of, I guess, the advancements? Because I think for a lot of people, either, from their mind, like 3D printed guns are essentially like hand grenades, or they're, these kind of like little 22 toys that, made waves maybe 10 years ago. Is that still the case?
No, but it was the case, right? So it's not crazy for people to have this vision of their mind of the 3D printed hand grenade. The first challenge to the powers that be, the hegemonic liberalism, the world democratic consensus, as Cody Wilson puts it, was symbolic on the level of the Liberator pistol. It was kind of a hand grenade if you didn't know what the hell you were doing when you were making it. And you would get, if you got a good one, 11 shots out of it. If you got a bad one, you would probably get a bleeding hand, not blow off fingers. Like, it would be bad. You would get a really bad cut in the beginning, right? And the worst you would get is a really bad cut in the beginning. But now it's developed. It's reached a high point of development. In that sense, like we start seeing these guns from the 3D2A movement, from the GunCAD movement, being deployed in Burma in the rebellion against the military junta there, or not Burma, Myanmar. Sorry, Myanmar. We're starting to see the guns that were developed literally by Jay Stark, you know, the person whose face I wear, um, right now. Like that is something we are seeing new examples of the FGC9, which is like the highest amount of development in a open source gun CAD movement ever. Like it is the pinnacle, and I don't think we've reached a new height then, but it is a competent, very well received action, right? The action, the base mechanics of that gun work. And there's many other guns like iterations on the 1022 design or the AR-15. I mean, just look at you know, what by the Biden Spain project, if you want to look it up on the odd C as you have to code word it, um, or the Orca project by Tim Hoffman. I mean, these things have reached a development high to the point where it's like, oh my gosh, like anyone can make this in your basement, and it is a real gun. It does the thing, as Cody Wilson says. It really does the thing, and it makes it a black talisman in the eyes of libs, and that's what I think is the beautiful part, and what I think the what the theory cells will term as like the Baudrillardian supremacy of the object. The object becomes a talisman in some sense. It's like, oh my gosh, this is a symbol of pure evil or pure good, depending on how they want to see it. But it's a technological advancement in our favor if we think about it in realistic terms.
One of the things that I've found incredibly interesting about this, and you know, we can explore this more at length, is that the amount of capital required to produce, you know, an effective weapon has never been lower, right? You know, effectively, if you're really in a non-permissive environment, you know, you can produce something like the FGC9, which has, you know, almost no regulated parts at all. It is all made from, as far as I understand, right, it's all made from, you know, 3D printed components and, you know, hardware store material. And the amount of money it takes to do that is achievable by almost anyone. You know, this isn't something like, oh, you need to have a full machine shop. Oh, you need to have, you know, 10 years of technical experience. And so obviously that's incredibly interesting when it comes to, you know, weapons, the capability to, you know, multiply human force. But, you know, there's also something to be said for the fact that, you know, we are in a situation, right, where we have a lot of talented, you know, young guys, smart young guys who don't necessarily have access to a ton of capital, but, you know, they're smart, they're going places. And so, you know, using that kind of, you know, I guess like framework of being able to kind of like, you know, manufacture, you know, produce a complicated mechanical object in your own, you know, in your own house, in your own basement is incredibly interesting to me. And you've done some more work in that space as well, correct?
Yeah. So the amount of capital that you need for what's called a pistol caliber carbine is like $700, right? If you're tooling up from nothing, right? And you think about that now in terms of like US dollars, like what does that really get me? That would just buy you a pistol caliber carbine of a regular manufacturer like Ruger or, you know, any of the other dime store brands. But if you think about what productive capital that also lends you, you're also getting a 3D printer with that. You're also getting set up to do a process called electrochemical machining, which is, you know, something that I think is going to lead to further innovations in the future in terms of at-home machining for reduced cost. There, you can't even begin to fathom like how low the ceiling has gone until you start to explore these avenues. Like GunCAD really has pushed the floor of cost per dollar value of what you can make at home beyond anything we could have imagined. You know, everyone thought that you had to have a $10,000 you know, CNC machine to do anything productive. That is so not the case. You can make parts with a certain mathematical formula to make up for what the difference in yield strength for plastic to metal, like aluminum. Like if you were going to spec something for aluminum parts, you can just simply make the part bigger, right? In terms of like being able to make something, period, that is not ignorable. You can now make something that is just, quote unquote, just as good as aluminum in your house, as long as you just make accommodations for the ergonomics of a certain part design to be bigger to accommodate for the lesser yield strength of plastic. Like, just that alone, not including the other innovations on like electrochemical machining or electrical discharge machining that have been made like here very recently. I'm talking about like in the last month, we've had a Kickstarter kick up for electrical discharge machining that is very promising for the regular at-home machinist.
And I think that this is especially interesting because I've been in kind of, red America my entire life. And I grew up around guns, and I grew up around what I'd consider kind of like boomer gun culture, you know? So for instance, either on one hand you have the kind of like classic, owns a shotgun, owns a rifle, goes hunting every, a couple times a year version of it. Or on the other end, the kind of, the Mini 14, love my 45, which, I have a certain amount of affection for because those are the people that raised me.
We don't dial 911 around here. This is protected by 45.
Yeah. Stuff like that. SASS and NRA hats and all that. And I love those guys, right? But there is something about it that I think that, younger guys, and I won't sugarcoat it, a lot of them are, cringe lolbert types. Sure. But the relationship to authority has dramatically shifted. It's shifted from, and don't get me wrong, the thin blue line guys still exist, but it's shifted from like, yes, whatever you want, like they made it illegal, we can't have it, to basically like, fuck you, I'll make it in my basement. Right. I don't need your permission, I'm going to do it anyway. And I think that as, for a variety of reasons, more and more of us look at authority and basically say like, oh, these people hate me. Looking at ways that you can essentially, and it doesn't just have to be, weapons. It could be anything. Looking at that ability to build your capability and to build your self-sufficiency, I think is incredibly valuable.
This is a reason that I look at, I don't look at the current paradigm in the same way as most of our sensitive young men do. I've become a steadily more ardent fan of Guillaume Fier's archaeofuturism in terms of changing man's interaction with technology, changing man's relationship to the future. And this is part of the reason, like, I'm a Christian, but I do see the value in Baptism. Or I said this on Oros's Discord once, the Baptists, and there could be a meme, I reject Mary and stuff like that. There's a whole funny discourse there because I don't want to be longhoused, but changing people's relationship to technology, I think is very much paramount. And I think men trying to become more of a master of technology around them, and that leads them into a line towards controlling their future, to controlling society's future in a way that they feel is constructive. I think that is something that is paramount. As the black pills are closing in, if you will. There's so many black pills you can take, but I think the white pill is to just start building, and that's my end all be all. There is like the white pill is when you start building, you take it in your own hands, and that's hopefully what I can impart onto everyone listening in this discussion is, if you start building, you will overcome what's called being green. I'm a tradie, by trade, if you will. And so you start to see people's perception change in terms of the great chain of being. And this is something that me and you talked about before the stream, was the great chain of being is still very alive and well. And it happens in the trades when you stop being green, as it called, or being new, as it is. And once you start seeing that, you start seeing your relationship to other people and how you are responsible for taking care of them. You're responsible for your project manager. You're responsible for your customer, and you're responsible for your helper if you are a tradesman, and you need to teach him something. You need to impart wisdom upon the youngers of you who are coming into your trade. And I may be just kind of rambling here, but hopefully you can save me. But that's where I was kind of like leaning towards in terms of like this whole discussion about GunCAD, about the theory of GunCAD and where it comes from Baudrillard, from Nick Land, and Cody Wilson, and how that is like a grand synthesis of how we come towards a new relationship to technology. And that's the more theory cell conversation we can have about what GunCAD really means. GunCAD really means about a new dialectic, if you will, between man and technology. And hopefully, I think more people on our side will start to engage with that conversation and start to figure out where I'm not necessarily a believer in dialectics, but if there is a dialectic to be had, and that is something that is that's a dynamic that happens in the social, or the scene of the social, as Baudrillard puts it. The scene of the social has a dialectic character, if you will, and I'm hoping to further that conversation in our sphere.
That's an interesting idea. I think that it's difficult, right? Because in many ways, the idea of the dialectic is kind of like it is kind of like tainted by association with very cringe leftoids.
Sure.
And you have the like absolute midwits, like James Lindsay, just basically saying like, look, it's Hegel, therefore communism, which I have absolutely no patience for. So I'm curious, and I know you said you don't necessarily believe in dialectics. I think I'm more, sympathetic to Hegel than not, but what is this kind of like dialectic you see happening between, as regards to technology, at least?
So this is the theory cell thing, right? Is I think the true dialectic is between John Baudrillard, right? And I think the most important book of his is Fatal Strategies. And also Nick Land, as he is interviewed currently in he had an interview with Justin Murphy posted 4 years ago, and with Red Ice TV. I think I'm trying to remember when that interview was. I think it was 2017. But in 2017, no, I think it was in the interview with Justin Murphy 4 years ago. Yeah, it was. The dialectic is truly between Nick Land and Baudrillard, and what their interpretation is that there is a death of the philosophical subject, right? Nick Land says in his own words that the subject, in terms of the naive human subject, is dead, right? The subject is actually capital. Capital has been some sort of prime mover in history since forever. There was cybernetic control structures around capital, in terms of an engine of mover of history, and that was a thermostat to make sure that it was tampered down. And eventually that thermostat broke, right? And so therefore, we can assume that the subject, in a philosophical sense, is actually not humans. Humans don't have the subject in a philosophical framework. It's actually like the teleological structure of humans have agency. They can be trusted to be logical agents in a political framework or an economic framework or whatever. That's dead in terms of Nick Land's thinking. But in Fatal Strategies, as Baudrillard puts it, we can see that the opposite view is kind of taken, and there's actually a dance to be had between Nick Land and Baudrillard, both kind of post-structuralists in a way, if you'll read me. And I'll bring you a poll quote from Baudrillard. Where one can see the drawing of a new gospel, the promise of the object changing into the subject. So in this is from The Object and Its Destiny from Fatal Strategies. What he's talking about there is that the destiny is for the object to become some sort of talisman. All of a sudden, the object in the philosophical framework actually has is growing into the thing that has agency. The subject is still the subject, but doesn't have agency. The object has agency now. And we can see this whenever a lib says, I want to ban guns. The gun literally is a talisman that has agency. It shoots people of its own accord, right? Like in terms of the funny meme logic of it, like, oh my gosh, liberals think that guns just shoot people, right? But that's actually what they think on a metaphysical level, right? If you go to the Platonic plane of their thinking, that's what they think. It's a talisman that has supremacy over how much agency the subject, the naive human subject, has. And that's the theory cell logic of it, is that the dance between Nick Land and Baudrillard is actually what we're seeing, because the hyperreal describes our current predicament, and also Nick Land's accelerationism adequately describe some of the facets of what we're living in now in terms of the decline of the human subject. Because I think, broadly speaking, that's what we're living through. We're choosing to have less agency. We're choosing to make less. If you want to transition to this in terms of real economy, right, back to our original conversation about defense infrastructure, manufacturing, and that sort of conversation, we're having less of that. In fact, there was a 2018 DoD report that said that our net production of defense technologies has gone up, but our capacity for producing these technologies has gone down, meaning we have less people that can make guns, bombs, and planes. Those people are a dying breed. In fact, right now they're probably 90 years old, and once those people die, they're done. There's nothing left. No one else in America has the requisite skill set and knowledge in terms of experience to actually interact with these technologies. And so the object is mystical to everyone, right? Because no one knows how planes get made. No one knows how bombs and guns get made. And that's, I think, an interesting facet in terms of challenging power as well, because all of a sudden, the people who are these fringe anarcho whateverists, right? The crypto anarchists, the Cody Wilsons, the cringe, I guess, LARPer of the Boogaloo on Twitter, all of a sudden have the capacity for these technologies. And I think that is an interesting dynamic, and it challenges, the liberal hegemony, I think, very nicely. And I think that is something that we can continue to do through other means. And I think straight manufacture of other products, we don't have to pursue illegalism or pursue some sort of martyrdom in the case of Jay Stark, which is the visage that, I wear as a pseudonym because I want to honor him, right? We don't have to pursue that path. We can pursue a path that eventually marches through the institutions, as you will.
Got it. I see your point. And it's interesting what you say, that we're essentially we're kind of giving away our own agency at a certain point. Well, one of the, you mentioned these kind of like crypto anarchist types, and to me at least, I've, like a lot of us, I had a brief love affair with Austrian economics and the libertarian sphere. But to me at least, it was never particularly convincing. As much as it sold a nice picture of a world that could be, just when seeing kind of like human nature, I guess, in application, so to speak.
Live and in color, let's just say.
Right, exactly. And I find myself very much in sympathy with Pete Quinones when he says things like, I don't understand how there are still libertarians in the world after 2020.
Yes. Which I agree sympathetically, but I'll let you finish your point.
No, so I just wanted to ask you, I know that you are, you are in these spheres with a lot of the same people. You mentioned that you have kind of this like post-structuralist background, but why is it that you consider that worldview lacking? Like what promoted you to move on from that area of thought?
Oh, that's a tough one. Well, I guess like that goes all the way back to the beginning. Like in 2016, I was a naive young boy. I was a kind-hearted young boy, I guess. And I saw, oh, Trump v. Bernie. Like that'll be pretty cool because like someone I don't like who is honest, like at least he's honest, in Bernie, like, oh, that'll be pretty cool. Like it'll be terrible. Like the consequences will be felt for generations. But that'll be kind of cool because then we'll get to see honesty in action in terms of a theory cell view, right? I didn't think of it as a heavy theory type thing going on in my mind back then, or the bull in the China shop, which was Trump, and I was like, this is a win-win. And then I was like, oh no, power actually works in different ways than I thought. And because I was in GunCAD before that. I was I was printing guns in my college dorm as much as I hate to admit that. Feds, please don't come get me, but no, I only printed part. I'd never finished a receiver in my dorm. Don't come after me. It was just a lie. It's just a lie. But that I always had this base understanding because I come from the Southeast. I also have this, like, my dad taught me how to hand load ammunition when I was like 10 years old, right? I always had this appreciation for the use of force. These terrible implements of violence are our birthright as Americans. And I come from a wholly Anglo-American background. I totally appreciate that. Like, the Second Amendment comes from a certain point in Anglo-American dialectic, if you will, to go back to that accursed regime. Where the Second Amendment comes wholly and in part, somewhat, from British anti-army ideology that comes from their Civil War, right? It's also why we have the Quakers in America to this day, right? It's part of a British anti-army ideology, and it. I sit back and think that there is something more important to the Second Amendment as a whole in terms of like how it was fulfilled in the American destiny. And I think that, to bring the 3D2A group to us is nigh on impossible, right? Because they are structurally, in terms of their body of membership, libertarian to a complete fault. They will always be that way. And I agree. This is everyone's going to cancel me, from the right take is I think that the trainees who are developers in the 3D2A space have a place. They have a place because they actually build the guns and they actually release the gun blueprints, or the STL files if you're in the know. They actually release them, and the step files if they're really good, right? There is a different dynamic in play, and my Substack article kind of goes into this. Is like the 3D2A people have a different DNA than us, right? And part of my motivation to coming over here is because I agree with the analysis of power. And Cody Wilson actually, he has mentioned Yarvin quite a few times, right, in his interviews with Michael Malice and all that stuff. And I float in that sphere where I follow Michael Malice. I don't think he's quite as much as a psychopath as Charlemagne thinks he is. And he is kind of a psycho, but at the same point, like, he has Yarvin on. He also has Cody Wilson on. He has people that are important. He platforms people that are important. And that's kind of what motivated me to come over to the side, because I realized that a lot of the vital energy is actually here, right? But what I want to bring, and what I talked about in my Substack article, is the DNA. Some of the DNA we can actually use CRISPR technology to synthesize into our own. And when we bring some of that vital energy, some of that hybrid vigor, as we call it, on a certain basket weaving form, if we bring that hybrid vigor on, we will start to see results, because some dissident activities lead to more success than others. Just look at Cody Wilson in particular, right? His group, Defense Distributed, actually preempted. If you didn't know, there was a new ATF rules making change that passed, talking about 80% receivers. This is all very Gunsberg stuff, but what it basically said was incomplete receivers with jigs and tools and stuff like that. You can't sell those anymore. Those are fucking illegal. We'll fucking put you in jail, right? And Cody Wilson said right before that rule release, I'm actually going to release a 0% lower. Like, you actually buy raw billet stock and you put it on my fucking machine, and you will make a complete gun in terms of a receiver set, in terms of the ATF definition, by the time you're done with it. Like, these people get results. And then the ATF, backtracked a little bit. They were like, okay, we don't want to give Cody Wilson the monopoly on this market because he's smarter than us. So we'll just knock it down to 80% receivers and jigs. So you can't sell those together anymore. So they get results, is what I'm trying to say. We want to bring that over to us, is what I'm thinking.
Right. Oros post for $2. Thank you very much, man. Who is this commie?
My brother in Christ, you know me. You know me, asshole.
For those of you who don't know, Oros, good friend of mine, has his own channel, Oros Post, and he's interviewing Mike. I guess I technically didn't poach you because I think we were in talks before, but maybe I did.
Me and Oros are actually good personal friends. I love Oros. I met him at the Nashville event. For those of you not in the know, the DR had kind of an event in Nashville a long time ago. It felt like years, but me and Oros met there, and we have become fast, good personal friends.
Well, good. I truly do. I truly do love Oros. So going back to what we were saying before we got distracted, it's interesting, right? And I think that this is, you mentioned kind of like the Anglo DNA to the whole 2A concept, right? I think one of the other things that is very much Anglo that I can never really get out of, because I'm similar. My entire family's been here. Basically, the latest arrivals were here by the
Mayflower. Say by the Mayflower.
No, not by the Mayflower at all. You and I are relatively close geographically, and let me tell you, I've got a long line of indentured servants and starving dirt farmers.
Oh, you're Scots-Irish, I see. I will oppress you again.
Actually, I'm a classic Amerimut. But anyway, what I meant to say is that there's another aspect to this, which is this kind of pragmatism. And at least to me, right, like I have strong feelings about, shall we say, sexual propriety, right? And gender roles and things like that. I'll put it that way. But nonetheless, right, you look at people who I disagree with on those issues, and I've had many of them on my show. I'm friends with many of them, but they do good work. They put in the effort. You know what? They move the ball. And so as far as I'm concerned, I look at that and I'm like, you know what? There will come a time when this is a conflict. But as far as I'm considered now, like, we're on the same side. We're pushing the same direction. And stopping to squabble and essentially make, a good solution impossible in the name of a perfect one that will never, materialize is just absurd. Yeah, Jacob, look, Jay Burden disagrees. Look at that. You got me disagreeing with a hypothetical person, I guess. Of course not Mike. I agree with Mike on everything. But to me, at least, I just look at it like, you know what? This isn't a situation in which we have kind of like the luxury of purity testing. Obviously, and I've recently been involved with this, there are some people you need to kick out. But generally, it's because they're antisocial. They're acting against the interests of the group. That I have no problem with. But when it's someone who is doing good work, pulling the same load you are, and helping you advance, it's like, well, okay, like, what are you going to do?
I
like, what are you going to do?
Stop you right there, because I know the perfect response to this, and it is it is stripped. Like, I am plagiarizing my favorite boomer in the entire world, Nut and Fancy, right? He's a gun tuber on YouTube. He reviews guns. That's what he does, right? Nut and Fancy Project. I'm not shilling, but he's my favorite boomer, right?
He also has the weirdest case of reverse charisma.
It's
Where
bad.
he has so
bad.
little camera presence that it loops back around being fascinating. But that's neither here nor there.
Anyway, so Nut and Fancy, he had a video, he had a very long diatribe about don't hasten the day, right? What he was talking about was the boog, right? Don't hasten the day when patriots have to stand up. Like boomer logic, yes, LOL, very understandable by that crowd. Very funny, right? But don't hasten the day towards the day where patriots have to rise up. But I agree, like that sentiment is also agreeable to all of us, right? It's like, listen, I understand that there is very vehement disagreements about propriety and being chaste and all this stuff, right? And it stems from a confessional background. And me as a Christian, I 100% agree. Just horrible, bad, don't do it, very bad. Please stay the course, pray, go to church, be a good boy. However, I will say don't hasten the day, just as Nut and Fancy says. Like, there's going to be an argument at some time, and it's going to be ugly. And I will hate to see the day that we have to punch people on the right. That is horrible. I don't on my base archetype is as a lover, as Oros puts it, because me and him are good friends. And he said, I read this book and it's all about archetypes, and you're a lover archetype. I can see it from here. I am a lover archetype. I love all people universally. I think they are all children of God, and they all deserve to have a fulfilling life and follow in Christ, and all that aside. Don't hasten the day, right? Love your fellow man as you would love yourself, right? And I think this is a very Christian message. I think this is a very good message for everyone. And the day that we have to argue amongst ourselves will be a horrible day, and we should, and I mean absolutely should, mourn the day that should come. But I do think that everyone is important, right? Not to say that we should spread out and be a big tent sort of thing, right? Just as I think that 2A, like 3D2A, is not necessarily made better by being a big tent sort of ideology. I don't think that dissident right is made better by being a big tent ideology. I think being a more concentrated group of highly intellectual, highly achieved, and by achieved I mean in the economic and in the intellectual sense, people don't hasten the day of conflict. Conflict, I don't think, is necessarily good, but it can lead to spin-offs, right? Ecological niches, right? I've been thinking about ideology more in terms of ecological niches in the current day, and that could spin off into a different subspecies that is more I guess successful than ours, right? We could have a spin-off of a spin-off of a spin-off that evolves into a full species, a different speciated agent of ideology from us that could eventually lead to the good day, right? But I would not hasten it, because it is in net harmful to ourselves until it is necessary for it to happen because of the ecology that we live in. And that's all I have to say about that.
That's a very well stated argument there. Mine is much more like Grug brained. It's basically like, do you have the luxury of making enemies right now? Because to be honest, you've essentially set yourself up in peaceful opposition to the most powerful empire in the world, and you've decided to, in doing that, start a fight with someone who produces valuable work towards that end.
So that's ecological space, right? That is the actual amount of space that your ecological niche in terms of ideology has to occupy, right? That's true, right? That you have less ecological space because we are being crowded out by a higher power, right? Because there's a super predator in terms of ideology in our midst, right? There's a limited amount of absolute ecological space in the XY plane, right? If we think of it as a 2D plane in terms of like right, left, up, down types of ideologies, right? If we expand it out to more dimensions of the ideology, right? Let's say we expand it out to 99 dimensions as like Dreg does. I'm a big fan of Dreg. If you follow Dreg and go through his backlog, if you don't, but let's say we expand it out to 99 different dimensions of ideology, right? Centrism in terms of centrism encompassing the cathedral, right, as well as other niche ideologies that are also sympathetic in terms of like living in the same ecology as that broader ecological niche of the centrist cathedral kind of thing, right? It doesn't matter how many dimensions you expand ideology into, you can still see that there's a limited amount of space for the dissidents to come in and actually be a parasite, because I think generally dissidence is a parasitic ideological entity, and should be proud of that until the point where it needs to become evolve past that into its own self-standing, multicellular type of ideology that stands on its own, is a vertebrate mammal, and blah 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 blah, right? In terms of how far that logical line can take us.
All right, that's interesting. You've given me a lot to chew on there. So we're kind of entering the last third of the show, right? And you mentioned that you wanted to specifically address kind of like a call of action towards what you described, sensitive young men. So do you want to get into that?
Oh yeah, actually, that was the whole reason I came on the show, Mr. Burden. No,
See, look, I told you I was paying attention. I'm a consummate professional here.
So the main reason that I came on the show, because I hate Jay Burden otherwise. I absolutely hate him. He's a bad person. Don't listen to him. Consummate. He's so agreeable. He's bad. No.
I disagree.
No, one of the biggest reasons I came onto the show was to have a call to action to all of you sensitive young men that are out there to start building parts, right? So let me give you a lineup of what I've got going in my life, right? I've got 2 FDM 3D printers, I've got a resin printer, I've got a lathe, I've got a CNC machine, right? And that's all I need to have a startup, right? You're talking about $6,000. Yeah, $6,000 worth of tooling and infrastructure, and I don't need all of it to make the startup that I already made, right? I could have gotten the startup that I already have with an investor, blah 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 blah. I can't talk about it too much because I don't want to break, confidentiality and, be too based in front of my investor and all that shit. But I have an investor. I'm making a startup in manufacturing, as nebulous as that is. You'll probably know it when you see it, assholes. That's the thing. You don't need that much for you to start making parts. And my whole call to action is something that I tweeted about, is the elites in our most elite financial institutions are starting to counter signal how much we've offshored, right? That used to be only the place of like Hicktown fucking like, oh my god, can you believe how much shit we make in China type people. Now we've got Janet Yellen talking about moving manufacturing closer to our shores. Now is the time to start buying 3D printers, CNC machines, and I can actually name one in specifics. If you go to Open Builds. Yeah, if you go to openbuilds.com, right? If that's their forums, they've got an openbuildstore.com, and you buy their C-frame CNC, you will start making parts out of aluminum, out of wood right now. That is what I want you to do right now, because you have the ability, as a sensitive young man who is competent in technology. You can watch YouTube tutorials. You can apply YouTube tutorials to what your use case is doing. Same thing with 3D printing of the resin or 3D printing or the FDM type. You can apply the same thing to CNC machining. Like, you can start making parts, or if you are more inclined towards making circuit boards and stuff of that nature, I would point you to KICAD, KiCad, in terms of designing boards so that you can start prototyping electronics by yourself, right? This is something that I think we need to do, because the movement of manufacturing away from extra-national borders is upon us, and it would behoove us to start scalping Mexico and Canada right fucking now, right? Actually, yesterday. You need to start making parts, and I think we can accrue a mass amount of power because we can become a manufacturing base, right? If, let's say that the military-industrial complex has to sub out, I don't know, like 30 different parts to smaller manufacturers because all the bigger manufacturers are just totally bought out, right? Like, over time, that capital accrues, and because you have productive capital already in your midst, you've already bought some of the productive capital that you need in order to start pursuing your own projects. You have already taken a great leap forward in terms of the real, scare quotes here, real amount of power that you have, right? You know what real power means? It's fucking Lenin, dude. It comes at the end of the gun barrel, right? Or now it's the drone, right? As we've seen with the Ukrainian conflict, right? So much of the front warfare that we see on film is actually part of some of these autonomous drone projects. And this is something that Schizo posts on a long time, is that what's called loitering munitions was going to become a much bigger and bigger and bigger part of warfare. And if that's something that you're interested in, and you should be, because you're a technical young man, you should be able to advance forward in your manufacturing capacity and actually gain some power in this realm, right? And that's my call to action to all of you, is like, you need to go to openbuilds.com and look at the CNC builds, and then go to openbuildstore.com and actually buy a build because you decided on what you wanted to build.
Well, fair enough, man. So we're kind of coming up on time. So if people want to find you, what's a good place for them to look for more of your work?
So I'm an infrequent poster on Substack. I'm at MikeOfPol.substack.com. I'm also on Twitter at MikeOfPol, and then I also have a very infrequent but soon to be more frequent Odyssey channel, where that's Michelangelo of Pol, where I'm going to post a lot more of kind of Baudrillard, Cody Wilson, that sort of thing into the future, and kind of like give a broader theory cell reasoning for what I do.
Well, great. And if I'm not mistaken, you and I met on Yiz's channel, right?
Yes, I've been on Yiz's channel a couple times. I very much love Yiz and her Discordant Dragon stream. I've been on there like 3 or 4 times. And Yiz is just a beautiful person. Hung out in person with her a couple times. Yeah, like I said, don't hasten the day. Like, we don't have to combat Yiz. Yiz is a beautiful person, is actually fighting for us, right? Don't hasten the day. And I just want to reiterate that another time, right? Nobody who is on our side presently and you have a borderline disagreement with, don't hasten the day. The time of fruiting of anger will come, and that is an unfortunate day to befall us. Don't push that into our future.
Well, thank you so much, man, for appearing. Obviously, you should check out Mike. As far as my stuff, you know where to find me: Odyssey, YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Anywhere you listen to audio shows, well, you can probably find me there. If you want to support the show, well, you can check out my sponsor, Axios, which is a good way to make something of yourself physically. Or if you want to support me more directly, well, you know what? You can find me on Subscribestar or on Substack. And the deal that I have worked out there is essentially a lot of my shows are pre-recorded, sometimes days in advance. And, in the time between me recording them and them going live on the main feed, well, guess what? They just kind of sit. And so essentially, what I've done is I've added those kind of pre-recorded episodes to behind the scenes feature. And you know what, you can pay me a little bit of money for that, and it does help cover the cost of the show. I don't expect it, but I do appreciate it. And remember, guys, keep your head up. The lie can't last forever. Good night.